everybody, it's Courtney and welcome back. Today I'm going to be making a one-layer floral arrangement with the Winter Botanical stamp set by Trinity Stamps. Starting off with a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock here. This is cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm going to be stamping my little poinsettias with blackout ink by Ink on 3 and stamping the middle part of the flower as well. Then I'll go ahead and mask these out because I want these to be in front of all of my other images. Next, I'm going to be stamping these little berries. I planned on putting holly leaves behind the berries, so you want to make sure that whatever you want in front of another, you stamp and mask first. I started just by stamping one of the holly leaves and then masking that out before stamping the other, just in case they touched or overlapped one another. That way I wouldn't have double stamping there. After my holly leaves were stamped and masked, I moved on to the next little leaf in the stamp set and just stamped on another part of the flower to make it look like it was coming from underneath the poinsettia. Mask that out, and that is all the masking that I'm going to be doing. The rest, I'm going to be taking some of the other images within the stamp set and kind of just filling in some of my gaps and my white space, just being careful not to stamp over anything that I don't already have masked. Now, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really have too much of a plan for this. I normally would stamp things out and kind of get my arrangement down before I start the card. I knew I wanted the 3 poinsettias, but other than that, I kind of was just winging it at this point. But once I had all of my images down that I was actually going to be coloring, I took the little pine cone that's part of the stamp set and just filled in any remaining gaps, making sure that I'm only stamping over my masked images and not my kind of fill-in images. Once that was done, I went ahead and removed my masks. Now, normally you can tell when you remove your masks kind of what your card is going to look like. This looked like a hot mess, but once we get everything colored, it will all make sense. So for the coloring, I'm not going to show you all of it. I'm just going to show you one of each of the images. I'm going to start off with this kind of plain leaf, I guess. I'm going to be using some YG 90 markers, starting off with my lightest color, mapping out my darkest area. For this leaf, I'm just going to be concentrating in the center and towards the bottom of the leaf where it's kind of laying behind that poinsettia. Going in with my darkest color, going over those same areas that we mapped out, then blending that out with my 2 midtones and then back to my lightest color. And I colored the other 2 leaves the same way. Next, we'll move on to the holly leaves. Now, I started off by covering the entire thing with my lightest color just so that I didn't get mixed up with what image was what. Then I'll go in with my darkest color, and the only shading that I'm doing here is around the little berries where they would cast a shadow. And I'm putting a little curve or a little C around where the leaf is kind of curved in on itself. Then I will blend those little curve lines out with my darkest midtone, then making those curves a little bit bigger with my lightest midtone, a little bit longer and a little bit thicker, I guess. And then finally going over the entire image again with my lightest color. And once again, color the other holly leaves the same exact way. Now for this little, I think it's a leaf, I'm coloring it as one. I'm just using 2 colors here, and my darkest area will be right in the base of each of the leaves and on the stem itself, going in with the darkest color and then blending that out with the lightest color. And I colored both the large one and the small one the same way with the same 2 colors. I did go back in with the EK Success journaling pen just to fix that one little area that I didn't really stamp that well with. Next, we'll move on to the poinsettia, and I'm going to obviously color this red. So I'm starting off with my lightest color, just mapping out my darkest areas first, just putting in some flick lines at the base of each of the petals or leaves, and then on the tips as well. This will make it appear as if the leaves are kind of bent out. Next, I'll go in with my darkest color, and I'm just putting a couple of flicks at the base of each of the petals and also creating a shadow for these leaves that are behind the others. And then once again, just putting one or two teeny tiny flicks on the tips of each of the petals. I'm just barely touching the paper here with just the tip of my marker. I want to kind of preserve these flick lines. Next, I'll move on to the R46, and I'm going over the same area pretty much and just extending these flicks out a little bit further on both the tips and the base of the petals. Now for the leaves that are behind the others, you're not going to have as much of a highlight on these. These would naturally be darker just because there would be more of a shadow cast on them. So don't necessarily worry about having the same amount of a highlight on each of the petals. Next, going in with my lightest mid-tone, basically doing the same thing here, just extending my flicks out a little bit further from both ends of the petal. And then finally going back in with my lightest color, and I'm just doing a few little flicks from the base and a few little flicks from the tip. I'm not necessarily worrying about covering up the entire thing. If there's little white streaks showing, I'm leaving them as is just because I do want to preserve those flicks. I color the other poinsettias the same exact way. And for the little berries, I didn't get really much of a contrast with these three colors. I kind of knew I wouldn't, but I'm starting off by coloring in the entire little berry here, then just putting a little curve or a little C with the darkest color on just one end of the little berry, and then I will make that C a little bit bigger with my mid-tone, and then finally going back in with my lightest color and just filling in the rest of the area. Now I wanted to bring in a different color other than just red and green. So I decided to color these little buds kind of like a golden yellow. Now, I'm not sure what these are actually supposed to be. I love flowers, but know nothing about them. So I'm going in and putting my shading on the top and the bottom of this. I'm going to call it a bud. I don't know what it is. Because this is a round object, I'm just keeping my highlight there in the center. So I am bringing in an E marker just to kind of darken everything up. And then I will blend that out with my YR marker and then finally the Y marker. Now for teeny tiny areas like this, you can go in directly with your darkest color first, which is what I did for the second one. And for the stem, I just colored those in solid with my mid-tone color. For these other little buds, I wanted to color them similar, but instead I didn't want to make them as dark. So I left out my E15 and brought in my Y000. So I'm going to cover, for the first one, I'm going to cover up the entire thing with my Y000. Add my shading with my darkest color, which pretty much going to be where these little petals kind of overlap one another and just a little bit on either side. Blend that out with the Y23 and then go back in with the Y000. Now these are even tinier. So for the other ones, I just ended up going directly in with my darkest color, then my mid-tone, then my lightest, and I did not have any problem at all blending these out. For small areas like this, I typically will go in with my darkest color first, just so that I don't oversaturate the paper and I don't have any bleeding. Once my coloring was all done, I'm going to go in with my white gel pen and fix up any areas that I was a little messy and went out of the lines. Also add these little dots back into the center of my poinsettia. Especially for red or any darker colors, you're better off fixing these areas up that you may have gone out of the lines with a white gel pen rather than your colorless blender. It pretty much only works for lighter colors or maybe really tiny areas. With reds especially, it's just going to bleed. So I wanted to create a little bit of interest on the card, so I decided to make it pretty easy and create a frame around my whole entire card. So I'm taking an EK Success Journaling pen and a T-square ruler here, and I'm just basically putting lines around the entire card. I didn't measure here, I kind of just eyeballed it. I would normally do this before I start stamping, but decided to add this last minute. So you can certainly save your masks from the beginning. and mask these areas out just in case you kind of go over your images. I just took my chances here. It ended up working out well, but sometimes it's hard to see those images where they begin, where they end when you have your ruler right there. Once I was happy with the placement of my little frame there, I did go ahead and stamp my sentiment in the lower right-hand corner with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and took a few sequins and scattered those around the sentiment itself, glued those down with my glossy accents, then finally adhered this to an A2 size card base. That is the card for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day. Bye.